Good evening. I sure hate to break up all the fellowship, but that clock on the wall, I want to go ahead and get us started on time. We'll have some trickle in here in the next few seconds. Good to see everybody this evening. A couple of announcements, and then I'll go over our prayer list, and I'll lead us in a prayer as we get started with our services. You're asked to mark your calendar. David and Callie Shockley will be having a come and go open house on Sunday, March 28th from 2 to 4. So, David, I look forward to coming into your house and seeing what all you got. Young people plan to attend a youth devo. That's going to be this Saturday at my house, Wes and Becky, out in Idlewood. It's going to begin at 5 p.m. We'll kind of get with everybody and let you know what to bring and whatnot. Sunday evening, April the 11th, we're going to have a memorial service to honor all those friends and loved ones that we've lost during this past year. You'll have an opportunity to submit names for the prayer list. Again, that's going to be after Sunday evening services, or on Sunday evening, April the 11th. So really keep that date in mind. That's our announcements on our prayer list this evening. Literally within the last 30 minutes to 45 minutes, we found out that Paul and Katrina are at the emergency room. Sam has broken his arm, so keep them in your prayers. Shirley Mosley, this is the mother of Donna Tobias. This is sister-in-law of Doris, is doing better from her brain injury and may even get to go home soon. Alex Weatherford is home with a cough and congestion, so hate that we don't see Alex with us this evening. James Dew will have an MRI on his shoulder this week. Be sure to remember all those who have lost loved ones recently. Again, we've had a lot of loss this last year. Let's be sure to keep keep all of our shut-ins in our prayers, as well as those that are in nursing homes and senior living facilities, especially Dixie Holster, Linda Hamilton, and Lyndall Gibson. If you will, let's go to our Heavenly Father in prayer at this time. Father in heaven, it's so refreshing and humbling and a joyful occasion to come into your presence this evening, specifically with brothers in Christ that love the Word. Father, I pray for all the souls that are here this evening. I pray, Father, for those that we haven't seen in quite a while, those that we continue to pray for, that are on our prayer list, that perhaps have a physical need, maybe even an emotional or spiritual need. We love our family. We especially love our spiritual family. And again, we lift these up to you in prayer. Father, I pray for the spiritual health, the future of this congregation here at Angelina. Father, again, it's such a great thing to assemble with your people, to study your word, and to grow in our faith. Father, bless us throughout this week. I'm thankful, Father, for men such as Scout that are not only capable of teaching the Word of God, but have a desire and enjoy doing it. I pray, Father, that we will learn from his example. Thank you for everything that you've blessed us with. In Jesus' name I pray. Amen.
The song before we dismiss the class will be number 559. Number 559. The joy of the Lord will be my strength. I will not falter, I will not faint. He is my shepherd, I am not afraid. The joy of the Lord is my strength. dismissed.
Good evening. All righty. We are in the book of Nehemiah, continuing. We're going to be looking at chapter 2 this evening. And I've got some homework that I had to catch up with y'all. The book of Nehemiah, chapter 2. We're going to discuss those questions that were given at the end of class. And then we'll jump into our text for the evening. Let me get through the slideshow real quick first. Okay. All righty. A couple of the questions that were asked last week were a timestamp of Daniel, Ezra, Esther, and Nehemiah, and if they were contemporaries, when we would have seen them, and how they would have been going along. Looking at that, Daniel had about 70 years of ministry. His birth was probably around 620 BC, and his ministry was about 606 to 537. So that would have ended up right there at the first year of the King Cyrus, or of King Cyrus. He very well could have lived longer. That's just the last timestamp we see of Daniel in Scripture. There is 537. Now, death is unknown, but it is genuinely accepted that, or generally, not genuinely, generally accepted that his death was around 530 BC. So a couple years later than what we've seen in that last timestamp. So that's about where Daniel was at. Now, Ezra and Nehemiah are going to come on a few years after that. So Daniel, if he was still alive, would have been very old in age when Ezra and Nehemiah came onto the scene. Another question that was presented was, did Esther have any relationships with the kings or Nehemiah? It is possible, excuse me, I have a cough drop in my mouth. Let me get this situated. It is possible that they knew each other. They are both mentioned in Susa or Shushan, the same place, in the citadel, in Esther chapter 1, and here in Nehemiah chapter 1. And they very well could have been at the palace at the same time. Now, Esther would have been, again, well in age, whereas Nehemiah is coming onto the scene. Really, Esther comes in chronologically before Nehemiah's story does. So we have to keep that in mind. But there was also the question, compounding on that, is did she have any relationship with the kings? Did she have any influence on the kings? And that is a very, very serious yes from me. They're very likely. She was not definitively the woman who birthed Artaxerxes, but in Esther, we see that the king there is Ahasuerus. That is Xerxes, which would be Artaxerxes' father. Now, Artaxerxes was probably from one of Xerxes' other wives. Esther was the queen, but Esther being the queen, she would have been able to work with and help raise Artaxerxes. Now, this could lend to the fact that, or why Artaxerxes really had no issue sending Nehemiah back when he asked him to return to Jerusalem, or to go to Jerusalem. Just a reminder, we have the microphone, so if you have a comment or a question, raise your hand, please. We'll get that to you. What did Esther do for the Jews when she was there with the Persian kings? She saves them. She saves the Jews. She's really working for them. Now, we also, again, realize that Esther comes chronologically before Nehemiah. So did her influence over Artaxerxes help give some concern for the Jews when Nehemiah comes to him? I'd say yes. I'd say there was a play in that. Again, not definitive, but the way the dates line up, I would say there was probably a very good chance that Nehemiah or Artaxerxes was at least given influence by Esther. Ezra and Nehemiah, as long as their timestamps, there's about a 30-year difference between when Ezra comes onto the scene and does the reformations, and when Nehemiah comes back to rebuild the wall. But in Nehemiah chapter 8, we see Ezra there with him, don't we? Ezra is reading the law. He's the scribe, and he's reading the law. They are working together. Any other questions from last week that I need to answer before we continue on? Okay, another one that was asked, and I apologize for not having the PowerPoint last week, but looking at a picture that we can see, and really, the best one I found today was actually off of a Google map. So Shushan, or Susa, where they were at, was about modern-day Iraq. So off there to the east, and Jerusalem on the far west bank over there. That's just a visual here of what it's anywhere between 800 and 1,000 miles between Shushan and Jerusalem, where he was going back to build the wall. Was Nehemiah ever from Jerusalem? Do we remember that? No. He was not. He was birthed in captivity. And yet he wants to go back, or he wants to go to Jerusalem and help rebuild the walls. Okay, there's our visualization of where they're at. We'll jump into it. Last week we looked at chapter 1, the Stone of Supplication. And this week we're going to look at the Stone of Preparation. So the Stone of Supplication last week, Nehemiah spent much of chapter 1 in prayer. He was looking back to their previous sins, both of his and his father's, is what he says. And he is asking the Lord for forgiveness, but also for the Lord to remember the things that he has promised to his people. And then in chapter 2, we're going to see the preparation that is going on by Nehemiah. Last week I gave a quick breakdown of chapter 1. We'll give a quick breakdown of chapter 2, and then go ahead and jump in to the text. Nehemiah chapter 2, verses 1 through 8. Nehemiah chapter 2, verses 1 through 8, we're going to see Nehemiah among royalty. He's there within the king's palace. That's Nehemiah chapter 2, verses 1 through 8. Nehemiah among royalty. Chapter 2, verses 9 through 16, we're going to see Nehemiah among the ruins. He's among the ruins of the wall. Nehemiah chapter 2, verses 9 through 16. And then in chapter 2, verses 17 through 20, chapter 2, 17 through 20, we're going to see Nehemiah among the recruits or the workers. Nehemiah chapter 2, verses 1 through 8, Nehemiah among royalty. Chapter 2, 9 through 16, Nehemiah among the ruins. Nehemiah 2, 17 through 20, Nehemiah among the recruits. Okay. Nehemiah, he knew that he could not rebuild the walls from Persia. This wasn't going to be a written exchange. Hey, you guys need to rebuild this wall. Let's get after it while he's 1,000 miles away. He couldn't just ask the people to rebuild. He needed to be a hands-on leader and to be a worker. One, the people had never met Nehemiah, so he wouldn't have any pull with them. Remember, we don't know much about his father at all, just the name of it, Hakaliah. And so that there was no namesake there, that he's just great leader or comes from a family of great leaders. So Nehemiah couldn't have just written to them and said, hey, why aren't y'all rebuilding the walls? It's also interesting to take note that, we'll get to this later, I'm probably jumping ahead of myself here, but it takes an outsider to look in to fix those walls, and we'll get to that. There's a lot of patience involved in Nehemiah's tactic here. We mentioned this both in the introduction and last week, but in chapter 1, verse number 1, he is there in Susa and Chislev, which I believe Gayla pointed this out. It's about November or December on the Jewish calendar. Now, when we enter into chapter 2, he's going to be in the month of Nisan. Now, that's about April. So you're looking at about 4 months difference here that that he's waited. He's been praying for this, and he's now in the presence of Artaxerxes as he's the king's what? He's the cupbearer. He's the cupbearer. So 4 months had gone by. There's a lot of patience in that from Nehemiah. There's a lot of prayer involved in that from Nehemiah. There's also faithfulness involved. Looking back to chapter 1 and his prayer and the things that he admits and also prays for. Remember, God, that of the things that you have told us. He prays, yet he's still holding his job as the cupbearer. He didn't just leave it when he knew he wanted to go back. He didn't just leave the job. So let's make some application on that right now. When it comes to our jobs, most likely we're not going to stay in one place forever. You're going to move up the ladder, or you're going to move locations physically. But if we leave, no matter the situation, we better be faithful to that work until the last day. You be faithful to that work until the last day. If our new job starts on January the 1st, we need to be working hard and exactly how we've been working up until December 31st of that previous year. And Nehemiah was doing just that. He was still the cupbearer, and he knew that he wanted to go back to Jerusalem, and he was going to approach the king, but 4 months have gone by. And in chapter 2 is when he begins to be, the king sees him as sad. So there was a time there where Nehemiah was perhaps just putting on a face to go in before the king. And now it's gotten so overbearing to him, he's been praying and asking God these questions, and now he's ready to take that step to move forward. But he worked faithfully to the king up until the moment he was going to leave. Remember, this is the same line of kings. This is Artaxerxes, the same line of kings that had stopped the building of the walls previously with Ezra. In chapter 2, as we begin, let's read verses 1 through and following until I figure out where I need to stop. Chapter 2, verse number 1. And it came to pass in the month of Nisan, in the 20th year of King Artaxerxes, when wine was before him, that I took the wine and gave it to the king. Now I had never been sad in his presence before. Therefore the king said to me, Why is your face sad? Since you are not sick, this is nothing but sorrow of heart. So I became dreadfully afraid, verse number 3, and said to the king, May the king live forever. Now here's what we need to look at in verse number 3, part B. Why should my face not be sad when the city, the place of my father's tombs, lies waste and its gates are burned with fire? Looking over that just briefly, pretty common thing to say in this aspect here. The place where my ancestors are buried, the place where my fathers are buried, it lies in waste. The city that I want to go to, it lies in waste. Now, something interesting about the Persians, though, is they were pretty superstitious about burials. They're still to this day, those over there in modern-day Iraq, they are still very superstitious about burials. They would have called it Yerevan back then. Nowadays, I believe it's pronounced Reyavan, or they've changed it a little bit. But they don't hold to an idea of heaven or hell. It's more of just a dwelling place of the dead, like a land of the dead. But what they do when their people pass away is they would fast, and they would present blood sacrifices for 3 days. Now, Nehemiah could be playing to this, saying, the place where my father's tombs are, he's trying to get the king to start to think, well, if my father was laying in this and I wasn't there to be able to prepare this sacrifice or whatever they were doing, not that Nehemiah was going to partake in that, but just getting the king to think, here's where my fathers lie and the city that I want to go back to, and it's lying in ruins right now. Just an interesting thing that I came across as I was studying. But again, he seems to be using the Persian superstition against the king here. He was opening up the heart of the king. Verse number 4. Then the king said to me, what do you request? It wasn't even... Nehemiah didn't just outright say, I need to go back, or I would like to go back. What he presented was, how can I be happy? How can I have a good attitude right now if all of this is happening back in my hometown of where I came from? But then the king says, what do you request? And then Nehemiah immediately prays in verse number 4 to the God of heaven. In verse number 5, so I prayed to the God of heaven, and I said to the king, so he's prayed already, and he asks the king here, if it pleases the king, here's where he outright asks, and if your servant has found favor in your sight, I ask that you send me to Judah, to the city of my father's tombs, that I may rebuild it. Nehemiah was a man of prayer. We've seen that just in chapter 1, continuing on into chapter 2. And Nehemiah here, he asks for two things. He says, let me go home, verses 5 and 6. And then in verses 7 and 8, he asks, give me this. And we're going to see what he asked for. So in verses 5 and 6, we just read verse number 5, so that he may rebuild it. And then the king said to me, the queen also sitting beside him, how long will your journey be, and when will you return? So it pleased the king to send me, and I set him a time. So Nehemiah was going back to Judah, or going to Judah, with a set time that he was going to return to the king in Shushan. Now, in verse number 7, here's what he's asking for. Furthermore, I said to the king, if it pleases the king, let letters be given to me for the governors of the region beyond the river, that they must permit me to pass through till I come to Judah. And the letter to Asaph, the keeper of the king's forest, that he must give me timber to make beams for the gates of the citadel, which pertains to the temple for the city wall, and for the house that I will occupy. And the king granted them to my according to the good hand of my God upon me. So he said, send me, verses 5 and 6, and he said, give me this, in verses 7 and 8. Nehemiah, he knew that obtaining these resources without the help of the king would be timely, and it would be almost impossible to gain the funds without the help of the king at this time. But the king gives him a letter and writes it to him for him to pass through all the regions. If you're coming through and you're a Jew passing through the land of the Persians here, you're probably going to get some kickback. But with that king's seal, with the king's letter, you get to walk right on through. And so Nehemiah is doing just that. But not only that, he has the permission of the king, or a letter from the king to order that Asaph, the keeper of the king's forest, gives him the lumber that he needs to make and rebuild parts of the city. The role of the cupbearer had some advantages, huh? He's pretty close to him, and he gets to ask these things. Any questions or comments through verse number 8? All righty, let's get that microphone over there.
You know, one of the things that I remember in this chapter, and I know you've come across it too, but Nehemiah was kind of taking a risk in showing his true feelings in front of the king.
Absolutely.
It almost be like us being in a similar position at the White House today, walking around moping and stuff. We might catch the president's attention, and that's probably not the best analogy, but I think it speaks a lot to Nehemiah's character that he was willing to make his true feelings known before the king.
Yes, sir. That is a good point. Back there in verse number 2, so I became dreadfully afraid. He knew that he very well could lose his life over this, but being put into that vulnerable position here, because he knew what he wanted to do, he was willing to do so for the mission he wanted to go on, right? For the rebuilding of the walls. Good point. Anyone else? All righty, let's continue on. In verses 9 through 10, they're going to continue on, or they're going to be almost a preface to verses 11 and following. But we'll read verses 9 and 10. Then I went to the governors in the region beyond the river, and I gave them the king's letters, so there's no issues there. He was able to pass on through. And not only did the king write him these letters, he sent with him an army, if you will. He sent captains of the army and horsemen with him. So he was not alone, and he was able to travel. And his provisions were most likely taken care of there. They were able to go with Nehemiah. Now in verse number 10, we get introduced to the protagonist of really this story in Nehemiah. We're going to see Sanballat the Horonite, Tobiah the Ammonite. They're both officials, or the Ammonite official, heard of it, and they were deeply disturbed that a man had come to seek the well-being of the children of Israel. What is this guy doing? Why is he coming here? Remember, they are ones that kind of pick at Judah. They're the ones that will be later fighting against Judah here throughout the book of Nehemiah. But they're deeply disturbed, not because someone wants to, not because it's the people inside the city wanting to rebuild. It's why is there someone else even concerned with Israel right now? Why do they want to come and help the children of Israel? We can make some application on that right now, can't we? Who looked at Israel spiritual-wise and said, I want to take care of them? This is your normal Bible class answer. Jesus, right? He looks around at spiritual Israel and says, I can help them. He's looking at them from the outside. But what man has come to seek the well-being of the children of Israel? And this is not going to be the last time we're going to see Sanballat, Tobiah, and later here in chapter 2, we're going to see a third man introduced into it named Geshem. Now he comes to Jerusalem. Now a lot of this is going to sound like a broken record to my sermon a few weeks back. But he comes to Jerusalem, and Nehemiah was there. Verse number 11, he was there for 3 days. Again, there is patience that Nehemiah is showing here. It's more than likely him planning. It wasn't, he couldn't just go into this guns blazing because he had no idea what the conditions of the walls were. He was told by Hanani in chapter 1 that they were burned down and broken, but Nehemiah had not seen them firsthand. So he needed to make a plan of what's going on. So he's really patiently waiting there. And he seemed to have spent this time surveying the walls. Verses 12 through 14. Then I arose in the night, I and a few men with me. I told no one what my God had put in my heart to do at Jerusalem. Nor was there any animal with me, except the one on which I rode. Now, this is interesting. Doyle actually brought this up, but it's an interesting thing to look at here. Why does it say there was no animal with me but the one I rode on? Anyone have an idea?
Did they bring a spare sometimes?
They could have brought a spare. This is a little smaller animal that is likely to have happened here. The Persians were big on dogs. They really liked dogs. They had a lot of them. Now, what's really cool here is in excavations they've done archaeological-wise, they have found the remains of dogs in the wall of Jerusalem. Now, I cannot say definitively, but it could be here. I don't know why he would have written this in here if I had no other animals with me besides the one I rode on, unless it could have been pointing back to those dogs that he brought with him. Perhaps it was that he had hauled those along with him from Persia, and he didn't bring them with him at this time. Just an interesting thought, an interesting thing to come across. Something I'd never even looked at until Doyle had brought it up a few weeks back. But Nehemiah could very well have had a couple of dogs with him from Persia. Yes, sir?
Yeah, if you want to do something quietly and not draw a lot of attention.
You don't bring the dogs.
I don't bring the dogs.
Yeah.
No.
You don't bring the dogs. Like pets, yeah. Like pets. Or guard dogs, yeah. But the neat discovery there that we've come across. So what I love about archaeological finds is they're always going to defend Christianity. They're always going to bolster the Bible every time. Every time they find something new, they go, "Oh, that was true. Let me look back here. This is what it said." You know, it's always going to find that way. Okay. Verses 12 through 14. Let's look at this. So, okay, I read verse number 12. Verse number 13. And I went out by night through the valley gate. Okay, let's see here if this will work. I know it's a small map. It's the best one I could find, but I did, as we go through here, I put some circles around where he was at. He went through the Valley Gate, all right? So he starts there where that circle is. Can y'all see that pop up? Yes. Okay. So he goes there. He starts there at the Valley Gate to the Serpent Wall. So he's on the west side of the wall here. And then he goes down to the Refuse Gate. So he's walking down the wall of the city, and he sees the walls of Jerusalem, which were broken down, and his gates were burned with fire. Okay, now he's coming to his own conclusion here. He's seeing what Hanani has said is in fact true. These are broken down, and they're burned with fire. And then he goes to the Fountain Gate, which is not far from the Refuse Gate. And then to the King's Pool, which again is just walking around this end of the city down here, or the wall of the city. He goes up there. But there was no room for the animal under me to pass. So we mentioned this in the sermon, but it's more than likely that the wall being broken down is crumbling so much that he cannot pass through like he normally would in a gate for a town, for a city. He had to dismount, and as he's doing so, almost as he's crawling through to get to see the wall. In verse 13, the word view in Hebrew is a medical term. He's viewing the walls. But the medical term there is, think about the skill or the precision. He's examining, yeah. To view or to examine the wall. He's looking skillfully. He's really paying attention. He's very meticulous in the way he's looking at it, almost like a surgeon would do as he's going to perform a surgery. He surveyed and he lamented, and then he sought to fix the problem. He sought to fix the problem. Is pointing out an issue leadership? No. Pointing out an issue is not leadership. Leadership comes when you see the issue and you present a solution, right? Or you work through it. Be a solution giver. Don't just tell us what's wrong. Come with an idea to help fix it. Be the leader. Don't come with an issue if you don't at least have some sort of input of how to fix it. We can all work on that. But also, if you're going to be the leader of it, figure out what the best option is to solve that problem. Why did he go at night? Any thoughts on that? We mentioned this in the sermon a few weeks back, but why do you think he went at night? Doyle kind of already mentioned it with the dogs. What are y'all's thoughts?
Well, he was on the outside of the gate.
Okay, he was on the outside of the gate. He was outside the fence. Why else would he have gone at night?
I think those other two guys would be looking for him.
Okay, that is a good thought there, Daniel. So Daniel asked, do you think Sanballat and Tobiah would be looking for him? I think so. They're deeply disturbed that someone's coming to try to rebuild this city that they like to pick on. Those guys definitely could have been out there scouting out, saying, okay, what's he going to do next? So he goes at night to be as sneaky as he can, not in a bad way, but just to come about it. You have a question or comment?
Well, I just thought as a project manager or something like that, I always like to go to a project before anybody either got there early in the morning or even at night.
Yes.
Because you can look at things and see them
Yep.
without other people's input and stuff. So
Absolutely.
It's
And
a good time to get ideas.
Good input from yourself. We have another comment up here. Looking at that too, things they'll change very rapidly, and so you can look at it all you want, especially if he was just going from Hanani's view of them being broken down and burned. If he went in immediately there, he could have said, "Okay, well, let's get to work," but he didn't know exactly what was going on. He needed to see firsthand, again, at nighttime, or something to put his eyes on it, to have that solution ready in his mind. Great point. Yes, ma'am.
Just going to ask a question.
Yes.
At this point, no one knows that he's there to rebuild the walls.
Correct. He has not presented that to them yet.
So if you just see a guy walking around examining really closely all the walls, that would be really weird.
That is true. That's a good thought also. Who is this guy that just came in from Persia with this armed guard walking around our walls? Good thought. We have another comment back there.
We should probably remember, you kept saying when he was talking to Artaxerxes, I want to go back to the city of my ancestors, but he wasn't going back. He had never been.
Yeah, I keep
So he's seeing this,
First time.
he's been told what it may have looked like at one point, but he's seeing this for the very first time, and he didn't have a Google Earth map where he could go,
That's right.
okay, it used to look like this, and I go here, and I go here, and so that whole thing that Greg was talking about where he needed the solitude to really take it all in because he'd never been there. He had no preconceived notion other than what somebody might have described to him as to what it looked like.
No,
and
great point.
and it also speaks to his abilities as a salesperson because it would have been very easy for the king to say, "You've never been there. You were born, you were raised here. Why do you want to go and build somebody else's city back up? What would be the point? This is your home."
No, great point. Great point. I've been trying to catch myself as I say that. He wants to go back, but he's never been. He's never been.
I wonder, you think maybe one reason he waited the 3 days, he needed
To grasp it.
like the light.
Oh,
Because he was going at night, maybe he needed light. to see
possibly.
a
That is
clear
possible, like with the
night,
moon
or
of where it was at.
going to be out.
It could have been that way. I think you could put all those together and really, as he's really just taking this all in for the first time, coming about and just evaluating what's going on with the walls for the very first time in his eyes.
I would imagine that growing up, he was probably told a lot about his heritage and culture, and Texans, I feel like, more than any other people in America would understand that because they have way more state history than I ever had growing up. And they tend to leave and bring people back here, and
Thank you, Justin. Thank you for
and
bringing
so
me to the
I
great
think
state.
that
You're welcome.
he had some pretty deep heritage that he needed to connect with,
Sure.
and you have to do that alone.
Great point. Good comments. Anyone else? All right. Y'all making class easy tonight. Okay. Continuing on here. So he's now at the king's pool, but there was no room for the animal. So he went up by night by the valley and viewed the wall, and then he turned back and entered by the valley gate. So he's back all the way to there. So he went down around the base, and now he's back up to the valley gate, and he's coming back in to the city. And the officials did not know where I had gone, what I had done. I had not yet told the Jews, and this goes back to Jessica's question here. I had not yet told the Jews, the priests, the nobles, the officials, or the others who did the work. So, again, this is Nehemiah's first-hand account here. He's telling them, he's writing to this. They're going to do this work, but I haven't told them yet. Verse number 17 through 20. He is now among the recruits here. He's among the recruits, among the workers. He doesn't shy away from the problem. It would have been very overwhelming to see those walls in the disarray that they were for the very first time, as Lynn mentioned. As he's coming from a place where he's always had everything taken care of, he was in the king's palace. There was nothing lacking from his life at the time, and yet he still had this deep desire to go and to fix the walls of Jerusalem. But now he's not shying away from the problem that's there. He takes the problem head on, and he has a solution. He has a solution. And what's his solution? Let's do this together. Let's rebuild the wall together. It's a great place to start. This would have been a seemingly impossible task to them. Remember, they'd been living there for years now. Those people who had stayed or who had survived, really, in Jerusalem. They were broken down as a people, as a city. They were reproached as a people, as a city. They were the laughingstock as a people and as a city. That's where Sanballat and Tobiah and Geshem, they love picking on Jerusalem here. But they responded with, let us get up and let's do it. Let us rise and build. All they needed was a leader. Too often when nobody stands up, then nobody does what anybody could do. And we have to be mindful of that as leaders and those who are also going to be Indians, right? We either have too many chiefs or not enough Indians, or too many Indians and not enough chiefs. We got to have that balance there. But they wanted to build together as the solution was presented. And then at the end of verse number 18, it says, they set their hands to this good work. They were ready to do it, and it was going to be a good thing. And now in the background here we see Sanballat, Tobiah, and Geshem. And this was an orchestrated front on their part. Those three men in their respective areas, they were a well-organized front. They were on it together, and they said, you know what, we're gonna be a thorn in their side while they're doing this. Who is this guy who's coming back to rebuild Jerusalem? They laughed and they despised and they mocked. They said, what is this thing you're doing? Are you going to rebel against the king? They were just really being a bunch of old grumpy men. They didn't want anything good to happen to Jerusalem. It was their pet, right? They could do whatever they wanted to it. But the people, we must take note there that they kept on working. Now there are challenges, as we see throughout the continuation of this book. There's going to be a lot of challenges here, and Nehemiah is going to rise up and help present solutions for those. But God is winning all the way through, isn't He? He's not even taking a misstep. He's going all the way through. But Sanballat, Tobiah, and Geshem, they think that they're going to win. Verse number 18 here, let's see. Yeah, verse number 18, backtrack just a little bit here. The people were saying, let's rise up and build. Something that we can also take away as those who are going to be leaders, don't shame people into working. Don't shame people into doing the work. If they want to work, let them work. But if they don't want to work, then it's not going to be a good project overall. Don't shame them into working. They must desire to work as much as you desire to work. Now, without it, if they're not, there's no way. Okay. Without it, if we force them into that work, they're going to burn out quicker than we can ask them to stay. Promise you. I've seen it firsthand. Not so much within the church yet. I'm sure that there will be issues there, but in the secular world, you see them. If you're forcing these people to do things that they're not desiring to do, they're going to leave you quickly. Well, let's see. Let me just try to get through verse 20 real quick, and I'll let y'all go. You're not hostage. You're welcome to leave. But they're going through, and again, we mentioned this earlier. But who is someone else that looked from the outside of the walls, looking in, spiritual wise, and said, "I can help them." Jesus. Jesus did, and we were sinners. We were in sin, but Christ was the Redeemer. And so He goes forth and He says, I can help. And now we have that Redeemer to look through. Leadership can be defined as getting the people to do something because they want to do it. It's those people that can look around and see that the opportunity is there, see that the people are willing to work, and then capitalizing on that opportunity, saying, here's what we can do, and they're willing to do it. Let us build together. Let's do it together. We'll go ahead and end there, and I might back up a little bit next week into chapter 2 and then continue on in verse number 3, looking at rebuilding the wall. Thank you so much for your comments and questions this evening. Looking forward to seeing you on Sunday, Lord willing.